Before we go any further, I want you to understand something very clearly. This is not poetry. This is not romantic suffering. This is not one of those beautiful phrases people use to make pain look meaningful from the outside. This is survival. If you're here listening to this, there's a good chance you didn't die daily because you wanted to sound deep or spiritual. You did it because you had no other option, because something inside you was breaking every single day. And yet, you kept waking up. You kept breathing. You kept moving forward even when your mind was exhausted and your heart was heavy. And maybe no one noticed. People saw you functioning. They saw you showing up. They assumed you were fine. But they didn't see the quiet battles you fought just to stay alive. They didn't see the parts of you that had to be buried so the rest of you could survive. So let me say this slowly, like someone sitting across from you, not preaching, just telling the truth. You were not weak for what you went through. You were not dramatic. You were not broken beyond repair. You adapted. You endured. You learned how to survive environments that were slowly killing you. Dying daily wasn't a metaphor for you. It was a strategy. And today, we're going to talk about that, honestly, quietly, without glorifying the pain, and without pretending it didn't change you. When survival replaces living, there comes a point in prolonged emotional, psychological, or spiritual pressure where a person stops living and starts surviving, not consciously, not with a clear decision. It happens slowly, quietly, almost politely. One day you're trying to build a life, and the next day you're just trying to get through it. Survival mode doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, from now on everything will feel heavier. Instead, it changes your priorities without asking for permission. Dreams become optional. Joy becomes suspicious. Rest feels unsafe. Hope feels irresponsible. You stop asking, what do I want? You start asking, what will keep me going today? And at first, this adaptation saves you. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Survival mode is intelligent. It is not weakness. It is the nervous system doing what it was designed to do when the environment becomes too much. When life overwhelms your capacity to process pain in real time, your system narrows the focus. It cuts away what isn't immediately necessary. It preserves energy. It keeps you alive. But the cost of survival is subtle and cumulative. You begin to live smaller without realizing it. Your emotional range shrinks. You stop feeling deeply, not because you don't care, but because feeling deeply hurts too much. You become efficient instead of expressive, controlled instead of curious, functional instead of alive. And people often praise you for this. They call you strong. They say you're disciplined. They admire how resilient you are. What they don't see is that resilience, when prolonged, can become a cage. Because surviving is not the same as living. Surviving means you wake up already tired, even if you slept. It means your body is present, but your soul is always a step behind, catching up. It means you've learned how to shut down parts of yourself without fully realizing you did. You stop trusting ease. You stop believing calm is permanent. You stop expecting life to meet you gently. Everything becomes a threat assessment. You read rooms before you relax. You measure people before you open up. You brace yourself even during good moments, waiting for the impact. And here's the part that hurts the most. The part few people ever put into words. When survival becomes your default state, peace feels unfamiliar. Sometimes it even feels wrong. Your system doesn't know how to exist without tension anymore. Silence feels loud. Stillness feels dangerous. Happiness feels temporary, like something that will be taken away if you enjoy it too much. So you keep yourself slightly guarded, slightly numb, slightly disconnected, not because you want to suffer, but because suffering has become familiar. And familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. This is what dying daily really looks like. It's not dramatic collapse. It's slow erosion. It's the gradual loss of spontaneity. the quiet disappearance of joy, the way laughter becomes shorter, the way hope becomes cautious, the way you stop imagining a future and start managing a present. And still, you show up. You go to work. You answer messages. You fulfill responsibilities. From the outside, it looks like strength. From the inside, it feels like carrying a weight no one can see. What makes this especially painful is that survival mode often begins in places where you should have been safe, in environments where you were supposed to be supported, understood, or protected. When the very spaces meant to nourish you instead demand endurance, your system learns a dangerous lesson. To exist, I must suppress myself. So you do. You suppress anger because it wasn't allowed. You suppress sadness because it was inconvenient. You suppress needs because they were ignored. Over time, you stop noticing the suppression. It becomes normal, automatic, invisible. And this is where many people misunderstand themselves. They think they lost motivation. They think they became lazy. They think something is wrong with them. But the truth is simpler and kinder. You didn't lose motivation. You lost permission to live fully. Your system is not broken. It's exhausted from holding everything together for too long. Dying daily wasn't about giving up on life. It was about staying alive in conditions that didn't allow you to thrive. And if you're listening to this right now, feeling seen in a way you haven't felt in a long time, let me tell you something important. The part of you that learned how to survive is not your enemy. It kept you here. But it doesn't have to be the part that leads your life forever. When you forget who you were before you had to endure, there is a moment that happens quietly in long seasons of survival, and almost no one talks about it because it's difficult to admit. It's the moment when you realize you don't remember who you were before everything became heavy, not in a dramatic way, not as a sudden collapse of identity. It's subtler than that. You just notice one day that certain parts of you feel distant, like memories from a past life that belong to someone else. You remember that you used to laugh differently. You remember that you once trusted more easily. You remember having opinions, dreams, impulses that came from somewhere deeper than fear. But now, when you reach for those parts, they feel muted, faded, not gone, just buried under layers of adaptation. This is one of the deepest costs of prolonged survival. When you live for too long in environments that require endurance rather than expression, you slowly replace authenticity with strategy. You don't ask, is this true to me? You ask, will this keep me safe? You don't ask, what do I feel? You ask, what is allowed here? And little by little, you become someone who knows how to function everywhere but feel nowhere. This doesn't happen because you are weak. It happens because the human mind is brilliant at protecting itself. When being yourself becomes risky, you learn to become acceptable instead, predictable, controlled, low maintenance. You learn which version of you causes the least friction. So you wear that version. At first it feels temporary, a necessary adjustment, a phase. But over time, the role sticks. And one day, you realize you don't know where the role ends, and you begin. This is why many people who have spent years surviving feel a strange emptiness even when their circumstances improve. On the outside, things are finally calmer, safer, more stable. But inside, there's confusion instead of relief, because the danger is gone, but the survival identity remains. You don't know how to live without scanning for threats. You don't know how to speak without filtering. You don't know how to want without guilt. And perhaps the most painful realization of all is this. You start to distrust your own desires. When you've had to suppress yourself repeatedly, your inner voice doesn't disappear. It just gets quieter, less confident, less assertive. And when it does speak up, it often feels unfamiliar, even intrusive. You might catch yourself thinking, why do I suddenly want this? Or, who do I think I am for wanting more? That doubt doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from years of learning that wanting too much leads to disappointment, that expressing too much leads to rejection, that being too visible leads to consequences. So you learned to stay small, not because you lacked ambition, but because ambition became dangerous, not because you lacked depth, but because depth wasn't welcomed. And here's something few people are ever told, but many feel in silence. Survival reshapes your personality, not because it wants to, but because it has to. It makes you hyper-aware of others and disconnected from yourself. You become excellent at reading moods, expectations, power dynamics, but terrible at reading your own needs. You know how to avoid conflict, but not how to invite joy. You become reliable, responsible, emotionally contained, and yet inside there's a quiet grief. Not for something you lost suddenly, but for something that slowly slipped away while you were busy staying alive. What makes this grief confusing is that there's no clear moment to point to, no single event to blame, just a long stretch of endurance that required you to postpone yourself again and again. I'll rest later. I'll feel this later. I'll be myself later. But later kept moving, and now you're here, carrying a life that works, but doesn't feel like home. Many people mistake this feeling for depression or lack of gratitude. They tell themselves they should be thankful. They compare their situation to others and minimize their pain. But what they're actually feeling is disconnection. From self, from desire, from aliveness. It's the cost of being strong for too long without being supported. And if you're listening to this and something in you feels exposed, not judged, but seen, I want you to hear this clearly. You didn't lose yourself because you were careless. You set parts of yourself aside because you were surviving. Those parts didn't disappear. They went quiet so you could make it through, and they are still there, waiting. Not to be forced back into existence, but to be invited gently, safely, without pressure. Healing from survival doesn't start with becoming someone new. It starts with remembering who you were before you learned to disappear in order to endure. And that remembering is not loud. It's slow. It's awkward. It's often uncomfortable. Because when you've lived as a version of yourself designed to cope, authenticity can feel risky again at first. It can feel exposed, vulnerable, unstable. But it is also the beginning of something real, not a performance, not a role, not a strategy, just you, slowly returning to yourself. When feeling nothing was the only way to feel safe. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles in after you've been surviving for a long time. It's not peace. It's not calm. It's more like emotional fog. Not sharp pain anymore, but not joy either. Just a steady numbness that feels strangely neutral, almost functional. And many people blame themselves for this. They say things like, "I don't feel like myself anymore," or "I should feel more," or "Why am I so disconnected?" They assume something is wrong with them, that they've failed emotionally, spiritually, or morally. But numbness is not a flaw. Numbness is what happens when feeling everything became too dangerous. When pain arrives faster than it can be processed, the system doesn't collapse. It adapts. It turns the volume down. Not because it wants to erase emotion, but because it's trying to prevent overload. This is something few people understand. Numbness is not the absence of feeling. It's the presence of too much feeling for too long. You didn't stop feeling because you didn't care. You stopped feeling because caring hurt more than you could afford. So your mind learned to protect you by dulling the edges. At first it probably felt like relief. Less crying, less panic, less emotional chaos. You became more composed, more controlled, more together. People might have even told you that you seemed calmer, stronger, more stable, and in a way you were. But the cost of emotional anesthesia is that it doesn't only block pain, it blocks everything. Joy becomes muted. Excitement feels distant. Love feels cautious. You still care, but quietly. You still feel, but faintly. Nothing fully lands anymore, good or bad. Life becomes something you manage rather than experience. And here's the part that's hardest to admit. After a while, numbness starts to feel normal. Feeling deeply begins to seem excessive. Emotional expression feels risky. You start to associate intensity with danger. So when something good happens, you keep your guard up. When someone gets close, you hold back just enough to stay safe. You don't do this consciously. It's instinct. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. It remembers the moments when being open led to pain. It remembers the times when expressing yourself wasn't met with care. It remembers how quickly things could turn, so it keeps you protected, even when protection is no longer needed. This is why many people who have survived long periods of emotional strain feel uncomfortable when life becomes gentle. Silence feels too loud. Stillness feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary, like a trick. You might even find yourself unintentionally creating tension just to feel something familiar again. That doesn't mean you like suffering. It means your system learned how to exist inside it. Another quiet consequence of numbness is how it affects connection. You may want closeness, but struggle to fully receive it. You might listen to others, support them, show up. But when it comes to letting yourself be seen, something tightens inside. You don't want to burden anyone. You don't want to need too much. You don't want to open a door you're not sure you can close. So you stay partially present, available but guarded, kind but distant, engaged but protected. People may describe you as calm, reserved, self-contained. They don't see the effort it takes to maintain that composure. They don't see how much energy goes into holding yourself together. And sometimes, even you forget how much effort it is until you're exhausted for no obvious reason. Because numbness doesn't feel dramatic. It feels flat, and flatness can be misleading. You might think you're doing better because you're not falling apart anymore. But inside, there's a quiet longing, not necessarily for happiness, but for aliveness. To feel something without fear, to experience emotion without bracing for impact, to let moments touch you without immediately preparing to detach. And here's something important to understand. Coming out of numbness is not a straight line. When feeling starts to return, it often doesn't come back gently, it comes back unevenly. Old emotions surface, delayed grief shows up. Anger that was never allowed finally demands space. This is why many people unconsciously resist healing. Not because they don't want to feel better, but because feeling again means feeling what was postponed. And that can be terrifying, but numbness was never meant to be your permanent state. It was a bridge, a temporary shelter, a way to survive a season that required you to hold on longer than anyone should have to. You didn't fail because you stopped feeling. You survived because you did. And now if you're here, listening, reflecting, recognizing yourself in these words, it might mean something inside you is ready to soften again. Slowly, carefully, on your terms. Not to be overwhelmed, not to relive everything at once, but to begin reconnecting with the parts of you that learned to go quiet so you could stay alive. Why letting go of survival feels more dangerous than staying in pain? This is the part almost no one prepares you for. You would think that once life becomes safer, once the pressure eases, once the constant threat is gone, letting go of survival mode would feel like relief. You would think your body and mind would celebrate. You would think peace would feel natural, but for many people, the opposite happens. Letting go of survival feels terrifying, and that confusion, that fear, often leads people to judge themselves harshly. They ask, "Why can't I relax?" Or, "Why am I still tense when things are finally okay?" They assume they're broken, ungrateful, or incapable of change. But the truth is much more human than that. Survival mode isn't just a habit. It's a relationship you formed with danger. It taught you how to stay alive. It showed up when nothing else did. It kept you moving when stopping would have meant collapse. So of course letting go feels unsafe. When survival mode has been with you for a long time, it becomes familiar. And familiarity feels like safety, even when it hurts. Your nervous system doesn't measure safety by logic. It measures safety by what it knows, by what it has practiced, by what it has learned to endure. So when life begins to soften, your system doesn't automatically trust it. It waits, it watches, it stays alert. Because in your experience, calm has often been followed by impact. Things would seem okay, and then they weren't. You would relax, and something would go wrong. You would trust, and it would cost you. So your body learned a lesson your mind may not even be aware of. Stay ready. Don't fully rest. Don't fully open. Don't fully exhale. This is why people who have survived long periods of emotional strain often feel anxious during peace. Their system associates relaxation with vulnerability, and vulnerability once meant pain. There's also another layer to this that few people talk about: identity. When you've been surviving for a long time, survival becomes part of who you are. You know how to be strong, you know how to endure, you know how to push through, but who are you without that role? Who are you when you're not the one holding everything together? Who are you when you're not needed in crisis? Who are you when you don't have to be resilient? For some people, that question feels emptier than pain. Pain gives structure. Struggle gives purpose. Endurance gives direction. Letting go of survival means facing a kind of emotional unknown. A blank space where you're no longer reacting but choosing. And choice can feel overwhelming when you've spent years just responding. There's also grief in letting go of survival. Grief for the time you lost. Grief for the person you had to become. Grief for the softness you postponed. And grief doesn't always come as tears. Sometimes it comes as resistance, as hesitation, as self-sabotage. You might find yourself staying busy even when you don't need to, creating stress where there isn't any, holding on to relationships, habits, or patterns that no longer serve you, simply because they're familiar, not because you want to suffer, but because your system doesn't yet trust ease. And then there's fear of disappointment. When you've survived enough loss, you learn not to expect too much. Hope becomes something you ration carefully. You don't let yourself want too much, just in case life takes it away again. So staying in survival feels safer than risking hope, because hope hurts when it's broken. What people don't realize is that healing doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like exposure, like stepping into a room without armor, like learning how to exist without constant defense. Your body doesn't know yet that it's allowed to rest, and you can't force it to believe that. You can't shame yourself into safety. You can't pressure yourself into peace. You can't rush your system into trust. Letting go of survival is not about flipping a switch. It's about slowly teaching your nervous system that the danger has passed, through consistency, gentleness, and time. And sometimes that means honoring the survival mode before releasing it, thanking it for what it did, recognizing that it saved you, acknowledging that it carried you through something real. Only then can it begin to loosen its grip. If you're listening to this and recognizing your own resistance to ease, your own discomfort with calm, I want you to know something. You are not failing at healing. You are transitioning, and transitions are unstable by nature. They feel awkward. They feel uncertain. They feel like standing between two versions of yourself, the one who survived and the one who is learning how to live. Learning how to live after you. No longer have to survive. This is where everything becomes quieter. Not dramatic, not inspirational in the way people expect. Just honest. Because moving from survival to living doesn't feel like a breakthrough moment. It doesn't arrive with certainty or confidence. Most of the time, it feels like standing in unfamiliar territory without clear instructions. You're not fighting anymore, but you don't know how to rest. You're not drowning, but you don't know how to float. You're no longer in danger, but your body hasn't caught up yet. So living begins slowly, and it begins imperfectly. One of the hardest truths to accept is that when survival ends, emptiness often shows up first. Not because life is empty, but because survival filled every space. It gave you urgency, structure, identity. When it loosens its grip, there's room, and room can feel unsettling. You might wake up and realize no one needs you to be strong today. No crisis to manage, no fire to put out. And instead of relief, you feel disoriented. That's normal. Living asks different questions than surviving. Survival asks, what must I do to get through today? Living asks, what do I want to experience? What feels true to me? What matters when no one is watching? And if you've been surviving for a long time, those questions don't come with immediate answers. They feel unfamiliar, even invasive. You may feel disconnected from desire, unsure of preference, hesitant to want anything deeply. That doesn't mean you're empty. It means your inner world was put on pause for protection. Living doesn't require you to suddenly feel passionate or inspired. It starts with small permissions. Permission to rest without earning it. Permission to say no without justification. Permission to enjoy something without preparing for loss. At first, these permissions feel uncomfortable. You might feel guilt when you're not productive, anxiety when you're not bracing for impact, fear when you allow yourself to hope even a little. But living is not the absence of fear. It's the presence of trust, built slowly. Trust that not every good moment will be taken. Trust that you don't have to stay guarded forever. Trust that you are allowed to exist beyond endurance. Another quiet shift happens when you start living. You begin to feel again. Not all at once, not dramatically, but honestly. Some days you'll feel sadness you didn't have space for before. Some days you'll feel anger that finally has permission to speak. Some days you'll feel joy and immediately want to pull back. That doesn't mean you're regressing. It means your emotional system is waking up. Living is not linear. It's uneven. Some days you'll slip back into survival habits, overthinking, controlling, bracing. That doesn't erase your progress. It simply means old patterns resurface when you're tired or unsure. You don't heal by never returning to survival mode. You heal by no longer living there permanently. And here's something important that often goes unsaid. You don't need to become the person you were before everything happened. That version of you existed in a different reality, with different knowledge, different limits, different wounds. Living now is not about going backward. It's about integrating what you've learned without letting it imprison you. You are allowed to be softer and wiser, more open and more discerning, gentler and more grounded. Survival taught you endurance. Living teaches you presence. And presence doesn't demand perfection. It only asks honesty. Honesty about when you're tired. Honesty about what you need. Honesty about what no longer fits. You don't owe anyone the version of you that survived everything quietly. You don't have to keep proving how strong you are. Strength already did its job. Now comes something different. Now comes allowing yourself to exist without armor, slowly, carefully, in your own time. Dying daily was never poetry. It was survival. And the fact that you're still here, listening, reflecting, breathing, means something inside you is ready for more than just getting through. Not more pressure, not more expectations, just more life. And you are allowed to take that step, even if it's small, even if it's uncertain, even if it scares you a little. That step is not betrayal of who you were. It's honor. You survived. Now, gently, you can begin to live.